Welcome to FreightWaves Today. It is Monday. It's mid-August. We're starting to think about Labor Day, Julie, and this is always the time. If you sort of think about the freight calendar, Labor Day sort of starts the holiday push, and then we get into holiday peak. But really, after Labor Day, things are starting to pump. And it is, weathers will start to cool off. You'll start to get into fall clothes, winter clothes. I went shopping this weekend and noticed that they're putting fall clothes at the men's store. So it just reminds you that we're not too far out of the holidays.
It doesn't feel like fall here.
It was
disgustingly hot.
110 degree, I think, in terms of the heat index this weekend here locally in Chattanooga. So it is hot. It does feel hot, but
I'm ready.
Kids are back at school.
Yes.
My kids are headed back to school this week, I think. So my wife is in charge of all that. She just tells me where to show up. But anyways, look, we're past it. Freight market is still not seeing that pre-Labor Day push. Tender rejections are still in the 13.5%. So nothing really crazy in terms of market activity.
No, really just sort of steady. And as we talked about Friday, it's still elevated from where things generally have been the last few years, even though it feels like a lull and feels pretty steady compared to the huge spikes we had earlier this year.
Yep, for sure. So a lot to talk about, a lot to dive into today. Let's get into the morning headlines.
It's off with an alarming wave of high-tech cargo theft that's costing the freight industry a staggering fortune. Scott Cornell, Executive Vice President and Crime and Theft Specialist at SPG Cargo and Logistics and Chair of TAPA Americas, confirmed that cargo thieves have stolen nearly $111 million in data center freight since June 3rd. Individual cases have ranged from $2 million all the way up to a jaw-dropping $38 million, with other thefts valued at $8 million, $12 million, $14 million, $20 million, and $24 million. In a disturbing new tactic, criminals deliberately crashed into security escorts protecting two high-value technology shipments, and the drivers then continued with each load instead of stopping. Cornell explained that the bump-and-run method only succeeded because the drivers weren't properly vetted and were working with the thieves. Cornell estimates that 6 or 7 out of every 10 loads stolen in the United States now leave the country through organized international crime rings that have built their own freight distribution networks. Over in Georgia, the FBI is urgently seeking truck drivers nationwide who may be victims in a massive 54-count tax fraud case. Federal prosecutors indicted 62-year-old Diane Marie Poe, owner of Genuine Financial Services in Walton County, Georgia, this week on charges including 32 counts of bank fraud and 14 payroll-related tax offenses. Prosecutors accuse Poe of keeping money that customers provided for estimated tax obligations or employee-related assessments instead of delivering promised services. Most of the at least 26 identified clients worked as self-employed truck drivers who relied on her company for bookkeeping, payroll management, tax preparation, and filing assistance. Many trucking customers found Poe through word-of-mouth referrals, and investigators believe additional clients may not even know whether GFS completed their filings. Anyone who hired Poe or used Genuine Financial Services can contact FBI Atlanta at 7702-163,000. Finally, Mexico's heavy-duty truck industry posted sharp gains last month, even as trade policy tensions continue to simmer. Mexico's National Association of Bus, Truck, and Tractor-Trailer Producers, known as ANPACT, reported that manufacturers produced 14,675 heavy-duty vehicles during July, a massive 51.8% increase compared with 9,668 units in the same month a year ago. Exports climbed 66.7% year over year to 13,117 units, according to data released by Mexico's National Institute of Statistics and Geography and ANPACT. Of the 71,377 trucks and buses exported through July, a staggering 65,983 units, or 92.4%, were shipped to the United States, making production trends and tariff negotiations key indicators for North American trucking capacity. ANPACT officials urged policymakers to preserve the U.S. Mexico-Canada Agreement's core principles and renewed their call for changes to Section 232 tariffs, saying the duties are harmful to economic activity on both sides of the border.
So, Julie, I think the craziest headline that we covered this morning is this bump and run. So these, semiconductor loads have escorts. That's not uncommon. But the fact is that there was some attempt to run into the drivers, or into the escorts to basically block it. Did you ever watch Lioness?
Yes.
And I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's waiting to do it. There's a scene.
The one that came out yesterday?
Yes, last night.
Yeah, I watched it yesterday. Yeah.
Essentially, it's sort of the same concept here. So anyways, I don't want to spoil it, but it does remind me of, right from Hollywood, of a organized crime syndicate bumping escorts. This feels very Hollywood. This is written for Hollywood.
Yes, it's incredibly brazen, and certainly high value freight. And I think the article alluded to that. I don't know what the protocol is when the escorts were bumped and then unable to continue escorting the loads. What the drivers should have done. The article alluded to they continued driving.
Well, here's the rundown on it. Is so these thieves, these organized crime people, deliberately crashed into the private security escort vehicles. This forced the escorts to stop.
Right.
The truck drivers working with the organized criminals were not properly vetted and were effectively working with the thieves, did not stop, call for help, or pull over as a legitimate driver would. They continued on and diverted the loads away from their planned destinations. The trucks and freight then disappeared. $111 million. Why would you rob a bank? Like, why?
Why
get
wasn't
that
there
you're
tracking
desperate.
on that freight?
Well,
and
there
maybe
is,
they removed
there's
it.
so many ways. Like, you're talking about $111, and a lot of this stuff, as we've covered, gets put into basically exports. So going to China, North Korea, places that are maybe even friendly countries, but all of a sudden now you have these semiconductors that if you keep them in the States, you're more likely to deal with the federal law enforcement. But if you get them to Russia or even China or North Korea or Iran or one of our countries that are not allied with us, you're going to end up in a situation where you can sort of get away with it. And so we're talking about one of these thefts was a $38 million, but this feels right out of Hollywood.
It does.
And why isn't the broader public talking about it? It's a $111 million theft. Like, that's a huge number. It's
and
a
it
lot
happens
of zeros.
on a public, on a highway.
On a highway. You have escorts, and all of a sudden they're getting bump and run. It does feel very Hollywood-esque. Like, it feels like this is something you're like, if you're in trucking, you're like, I watch these things in these Hollywood movies and TV shows, and they show this, and you're kind of like, I don't know if this feels right. Yeah, but this absolutely is an insane thing. Semiconductors that were bump and run, escorts that were cut off. I definitely think this is a made-for-TV show.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of the Hollywood made-for-TV and Lioness, so you've been saying how insane these drone attacks are, and how vulnerable supply chains can be, and in war, how important supply chains are, right? So we've seen that from the refineries being blown up, but now it's all of these Wildberries.
For those that aren't on X or on social media,
I watched this video
this was a warehouse, and there had been, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but there are something like more than 20 warehouses.
Yes, I do. I looked it up this morning.
Wildberries is the equivalent of Amazon in Russia. And the Ukrainians, because their argument is that the Wildberry distribution network is using that the Russian military is using the distribution network to deliver weapons and supplies to the Russian military, and therefore they're taking out these warehouses and they're just taking drones into the country with explosives and blowing these warehouses up, and these things just incinerate. Now, one of the things that was interesting on X, somebody pointed out, is the way that they build these warehouses in Russia are incredibly flammable, very different than in the United States. So in the United States, I asked the question, because if you remember a couple of months ago, that Kimberly-Clark warehouse that was in Southern California in LA, actually is an NFI managed warehouse. The dude gets mad because he's mad about his pay or something, and he ends up lighting the Kimberly. You remember this? You don't remember this warehouse fire? There was like $200 million in product. It was a Kimberly-Clark warehouse of toilet paper and Kleenexes and all that fun stuff. And the guy was working on the docks, got mad, had a grievance with his employer, and ends up basically lighting a fire to the toilet paper, and it incinerates the whole warehouse. What's interesting about it is that the warehouse catches fire, the whole thing burns down, except the walls, because they're made out of concrete. And so in America, we build our warehouses full of concrete, which means they're not as vulnerable. The ceilings are not as vulnerable.
Do they not have sprinklers?
Yeah, they have sprinklers. I don't think in Russia maybe that's the problem,
not.
is they don't have sprinkler systems and therefore they're more likely. But you take an explosive into a warehouse, you've got all sorts of different products. You have explosives that go off, and inevitably these things are meant to catch fire. And it's a scary situation for anybody because it means that our civilians, someone pointed out, yes, but they would have to come from Canada or Mexico. And I would disagree with that, is that if you go back to Operation Spiderweb, which happened in Ukraine, do you know about this situation?
Is this sort of the Trojan horse container situation? Or
yeah, so they brought a specialized container deep into Russia. So this was early on in the war. And it was a specialized container unit, trailer unit essentially, that the top would come off and all these drones, these explosive drones would come flying. They took out an Air Force base, a Russian Air Force base. That is the concern. We've been highlighting it. Tom Koza from Gulf Oil talked about it last week, about this risk is real. It's just something that I think is on everybody's mind.
Yeah, so here's the numbers. They've struck nearly 20 Wildberries related sites. And then this major one on August 15th,
so they're taking out the top
was
two.
Their largest hub. And they also at the same time hit a second logistics site. And 7 of the largest Wildberries hubs have been either significantly damaged or completely knocked out.
It's the equivalent of Amazon's big warehouse operations in Cincinnati. It's the equivalent of taking out their big mega hub in Cincinnati.
Yeah. So this is supply chain and fulfillment, and it's
supply chains are the front lines.
Yeah.
Like we're in the second Cold War. You could argue that we are, and people have said that World War III has started. And I think we all imagined growing up World War III would be full of nukes. That's the way you sort of remembered it. This is first of all, it's a brand new type of warfare. It's scary. It's something that unfortunately in supply chains, you're on the front lines. People are trying to disrupt. Logistics wins wars, and this is exactly what we're seeing. So hopefully we'll get some resolution soon. But it's having a major impact on the Russian economy. And it's just something that we're definitely going to keep an eye on. Let's move on to happier stories, maybe happier stories. And to talk about that, we had U.S. Bank's Jeff Pape. He is in charge of transportation at U.S. Bank Corporate Payment Systems, CPS. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm good, Greg. How are you? Thanks for having me.
This has been, unfortunately, if it bleeds, it leads. We've got drone warfare happening. We've got theft, this major $111 million theft story. Feels like we are watching a Taylor Sheridan show in freight these days. I don't know if you call it the headline, but the idea that these escorts that it was a load of semiconductors, and these 2 escorts got cut off, or these escort trucks got cut off, and all of a sudden bump and run. The truck drivers working with organized crime groups ended up taking and diverting the load to some nefarious warehouse. Any thoughts on the current proliferation of crime theft happening in freight?
Yeah, it's really remarkable how it's continued to be such a big issue, and we're talking with customers more and more about it because, as you said, this bump and run activity is getting more prevalent. Just the brazenness of these thieves and the network they have to move these goods once they get control of them, and frankly, the sophistication is something we haven't seen before. So, this rerouting of trucks that at times the driver is innocent to and not even knowing, but they get instructions to deliver the goods to a different location. It's pretty sophisticated, and frankly, it's requiring a lot more visibility and a lot more data analytics to try to help solve it for both shippers and carriers, because it's a big problem we hear from both of our customers.
So, Jeff, you have been around this business for some time. U.S. Bank is obviously one of the most important institutions helping shippers pay freight bills. But fraud mitigation, fraud management, fraud monitoring is sort of built into your business model, as it is anybody that's in the payment stream. What kinds of emerging threats are we seeing? What are you guys, in terms of monitoring, having to think different today than maybe you did 10 years ago?
It's really a fast moving, even beyond emerging trend. It's really around, if you think about the screening that needs to take place, do you have new addresses that have been established for carriers? Do you have new companies that are just starting out? Are there things about their email addresses that cause you to really consider, are they a true company or not? And then there's this whole network of buying and frankly, identity theft of DOT credentials that nefarious companies start to, or nefarious carriers start to use to really, steal and take control of these goods. So it's really, interesting to see the change that's taking place between what we see in the financial fraud kind of activity side and then in the supply chain fraud and activity side. And some of the same kind of protocols and some of the same things you need to look for are starting to extend into supply chain.
So, what is shippers thinking differently about whom their partners are? Are you seeing shippers be more selective in terms of carrier base? Are they actually, and brokers for that matter? What is changing in how shippers are underwriting who's hauling their freight?
Well, they're really doing a lot more investigation, if you will. And we've often heard of this term, right? There's different points in the market where it's important for you to be a shipper of choice or a carrier of choice. But it's really that trusted collaboration between the two that's probably never been more important than it is today. So some of the upfront, I think of it as due diligence, but validation, if you will, that you've got a trusted party, whether you're a shipper or a carrier, that this trusted party is the person that you're going to have either move your goods or procure your goods. And there's a lot of different validations that companies are using to establish that trusted party. And companies have different definitions of that, but it is all around this trusted party, trusted participant.
Jeff, I chuckle because the term shipper of choice is used a lot right now. But during the depths of the Great Freight Recession, you didn't hear a lot of it. Now, that's not fair to every shipper because we have a shipper choice awards that a lot of shipper departments take a lot of pride in. But it probably wasn't the primary role for every shipper. They're kind of like, hey, I'm just here to save money. But it now is back in vogue, or at least in trend, because they realize that they have to work with carriers that are going to provide services. Because right now, it's really whom can you do business with? Will they provide the capacity? So, but it is interesting because that term always gets elevated. Even Google search terms, we monitor that pick up as freight as capacity tightens.
Yeah, and you're right, Craig. There's a lot of pride, whether you're a shipper of choice or a carrier of choice, and there's a lot of companies out there that aspire to do that, which is great. What I would say is interesting right now is the structural change that's happening in being that partner of choice, if you will, and it's around, in the past, it's really been around economic cycles and ups and downs in the economy. But when you think about the structural piece today, whether that's fuel price volatility, whether it's insurance, whether it's some of the legislation that's occurring in the trucking space, it feels much more structural and foundational than it has been economic. Feels much more that way today than it's been in the past.
So, Julie, I mean, you talk to a lot of our shipper clients on Sonar. What are you hearing in terms of things that they're thinking about?
So I think they are thinking about what they can do to ensure that they have capacity and minimize rate exposure, right? Are there other soft things that they can look at? Can they change the way they're contracting? Can they change pay terms? What is the cost within their network of changing carriers? What does that look like, right? And is there an actual, not just service, but dollar amount cost with that and resetting up a new carrier, reestablishing pools, all of those sorts of things. So I think they're looking at it a little bit more holistically from what I'm hearing. So I want to talk a little bit about the freight payment index. Can you tell us sort of the headline numbers? We know that certainly costs were up without volumes really being up, but can you give us a little bit of an overview of what you all found?
Yeah, well, what we found is that, as we start getting into the early holiday season, there's a lot of optimism, if you will, in some of the retailers, but it's really around the transparency of that cost and the predictability, and frankly, the early planning. As you look at the broader economy and you see what's happening with rates and with fuel charges, there are different parts of the economy that and different regions of the country that are impacted by what's happening in the economy. Overall, we're seeing as capacity is tightened, we're seeing rates are staying steady, rates are increasing, and we've seen that across the board in the index. One of the things that we are most pleased about is the regional coverage of the index and the insights that provides to customers to help make more informed decisions, whether they're moving goods across the country or they're staying within a certain region.
What are you seeing? Are there specific regions that are having sharper swings than others currently?
Well, we're seeing the Northeast continuing to be strong. Some of the imports and that in the Southwest have been more impacted, but we're seeing different pockets of that. And then, of course, there's all of the time that the goods are taking to get into the ports and movement across the ocean. So there are pockets that we're seeing different performances in, yes.
So Jeff, I'd like to talk a little bit about sector specific, because there's been a lot of conversation this year about certain sectors as sort of a winner loser kind of a world. We've been tracking industrials. Obviously, rail data gives us a really awesome perspective. Flatbed has been super robust. But when it comes to retail, it seems to be a little bit of question around particularly CPG, food, specifically food and bev, seems to have these weird sort of, I wouldn't call weird, but these sort of headwinds against them, SNAP payments, consumers sort of changing the types of food that they consume, food and bev, alcohol consumption's at sort of record lows relative to population. I'd love for you to dive into where are you seeing winners and losers right now in the economy?
Well, right now, I think you captured it well. What we're seeing is in the different market segments, there's certainly the construction industry that's tied to the interest rates and what we're seeing there, and people buying homes, and that has a big ripple effect, right? So if you're building a new home, you need lumber, you need appliances, you need all carpet and all of that stuff. So those industries we're seeing an impact in, but it's very, very clear that customer and consumer behavior is changing. And then you get into some of the structural changes that we talked about. And unfortunately, there's been some situations where there's been recalls on different food products. That has a big impact as well. What we are seeing is some of our retail shipping customers are cautiously optimistic about the rest of year and going into the holiday season. What they're most concerned about is the predictability and the transparency and all of the planning that they're doing earlier. We've seen, there's always a run up to the holidays. There's always a run up, whether that's in the food and bev or whether that's in the consumer goods as you start looking at holiday gifts. But what we're seeing this year is that a lot of shippers are starting to plan a lot earlier. And they're okay with the rates that they're at as long as that comes with dependability. So it's really that insight and earlier planning that's so critical to them.
So it's interesting you said that. We had a guest on, I think it was last week, that she does returns processing for major consumer brands. And she said exactly that, is that this peak season is starting much earlier. I think she used the term Summerween, which is this Halloween. And by the way, I saw this before we ever spoke with her. I was at a grocery store over the 2 weekends ago and noticed that they'd already had the Halloween candy out. And it's like, man, that is, either this stuff was left out. That's what my initial thought was. I don't know if this is like fresh, because it's sort of like in one corner. But we're starting to see retailers talk about Halloween. I mean, it's the next major sort of retail push holiday. But to your point, and we heard from the Port of LA director a few weeks ago about how bullish they are on the second half. They think it's going to be a really strong peak season. They're certainly seeing a lot of activity. But it also strikes us that one of the reasons that intermodal is doing well is because there's longer lead times, as there isn't these sort of massive disruptions and sort of surges that are unexpected. But does this mean we're going to have a more muted October and November than maybe what we otherwise would because the freight would already be here? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it'll probably be a little bit lower than historical, and I don't think we'll see the big run up. I think what we will see is more consistency. And isn't that what everybody would really like to have is more predictability and more consistency in this? So if the markets can start to see that, whether you're a shipper or whether you're a carrier, it makes all of this supply chain run a bit smoother in against a backdrop of just an awful lot of uncertainty right now. But I do think we probably won't see the October, November run up that we normally have.
Jeff, I think you're
more
saying
elongated
everyone cares about that, wants that, except brokers. They love the volatility.
Yeah.
They like those peak season, those surges. And the spot drivers, the drivers that are owner operators really enjoy those, $10 loads that they get on occasion. Those are sort of folklore. I love seeing as we go into these peaks on X where you get a driver who's posting, his big rip, the price that he's paying.
Yep.
It's always fun because you're like, this feels, I was a freight broker, was on a trading floor of a freight brokerage. And I remember those rips of the day, it didn't matter how many normal loads we did that paid, $50 or $100 a margin. It was the one that we made the $1,000 on.
the lottery, yeah.
It was like, hey, this is what
Good
was
bet.
the folklore. Like that's really what this. Like the floor people care about that. The CFOs and the CEOs care about consistency. But if you're on the floor, it's those big surges, and unfortunately, you need a lot of volatility and you need tightness to get those big brips.
You do, most certainly. And the folks we talk a lot with, the folks that are doing the planning, the CFOs that we speak with, the director of logistics, they like predictability. And
Well,
they
you
like
work with procurement people and finance people. That's who works with the banks, Jeff. Like, they do not want these surges. They don't want to be the poster child of the rip of the day. Nobody except the brokers want that.
Right.
Jeff, in speaking with your customers, shippers, and carriers, what are you hearing that might not be showing up in the data?
I think, Julie, what we're hearing right now is the continued evolution of AI and its capabilities. I would tell you, there's been a lot of interest in AI. Most recently, and that being this year, there's starting to be more use cases for what can AI do. So we think of it as moving from curiosity and learning about AI to now what are the practical applications. So customers are looking for ways to reduce manual work. They're looking for trusted ways to make better decisions and faster decisions. So I think, we're spending a lot of time with customers talking about use cases for AI, the application of those, and really moving from more experimental to practical, I would say. And I see that trend continuing for sure for the next year. And we'll probably see more use cases coming out in the next year and a half for sure.
So Jeff, I'd love to talk about the cycle because everyone sort of, we always get the cycle wrong. We know it's a cycle. It's a cycle of some sort. It's always easy after the fact to sort of see the cycle, but when you're in the middle of it, it's always hard to guess. You have any thoughts on whether this trucking cycle goes on for another year, a couple more years? Any sort of thesis that you guys have right now?
My own opinion would be that I would see this continuing through, if not the shortest mid next year, all the way through next year. So I think, the conditions that are there today, certainly the volatility that's there, will probably take a little bit longer to solve. Fuel prices and that volatility continues to be a big concern. But also as that uncertainty continues, as there's more efficiency driven, whether that's through AI or better planning, I think you'll start to see some normalization there. But I do see the market continuing through next year for sure, Craig.
So Jeff, you guys work closely with the U.S. Postal Service. We've covered the sort of public statements of the U.S. Postal Service about the the fact that Congress needs to make some changes to any thoughts on that? Anything you can offer in terms of commentary on the Postal Service right now?
Not really. Just the continuing evolution and adoption of technologies, but that's probably just the observation I have.
I hope that the Congress steps in. We've talked about how important that is a utility, and it's always interesting where people sort of use it as a lightning rod, and they sort of compare the success of UPS and FedEx. But these are not government-mandated institutions. There's a lot of things that UPS and FedEx can do that Congress doesn't get to have a say in. And we're advocating for the U.S. Postal Service here at FreightWaves because we know how important and critical it is to our economy. I hope Congress reforms gives the Postal Service the freedom to do the things that they need to do. So really interesting. So Jeff, before I go, let's talk a little bit about credit quality, something you guys as a bank are tracking constantly. Is there any pockets of the overall freight economy that you're looking at in terms of credit? Just questions about sort of the sustainability and the credit quality of those sectors?
No, I would say, when we look across the broader economy, Craig, the credit quality is good. There's certain pressures, and again, that kind of falls into the structural changes, right? The volatility on fuel is causing a cost to go up with a lot of carriers, and they're looking for help in trying to solve that. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. We're not seeing any weakness in pockets. What we are seeing is making smarter decisions, making more informed decisions, and that's really being driven by if companies used to look at maybe a handful of data points to make a decision, now they're looking at a broader sense. So the visibility and transparency of some of that data is becoming even more and more important. But we're not seeing any strong weaknesses in the freight carrier or shipper market from a credit perspective.
Well, hopefully there's no big credit issue. I think the biggest risk everyone on Wall Street has identified is if something spoils the AI bubble or run or acceleration, that feels like probably the highest risk right now in the economy. It's sort of like a black swan event maybe, but that appears to be the biggest thing on people's radar is because the amount of capital that's been poured into these businesses, that could be the biggest risk out there. Something to monitor. And look, I would argue that freight and logistics companies, railroads, trucking companies, these are AI stocks these days. Like they are benefiting from the AI build-out, construction build-out. So hopefully these AI data centers continue to construct, continue to deliver returns. I mean, the numbers are astounding, Julie, on just how successful these AI companies are in revenue, but also the amount of money and capital they're deploying. Absolutely astounding. Well, Jeff, really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. We'll have to have you back next quarter to talk about all the things that you guys are seeing. You're on the front lines of payments in our space. So appreciate you coming.
Thanks for having us. Have a good day.
Man, Minneapolis looks great this time of year.
Yeah.
Like he's sitting in his office, he's got blue skies.
Yeah.
I kind of want to go there this time. Not in the December days. So we'll be right back with FreightWaves Today. We're going to talk Tesla semis later in the show. And we're going to talk we have two guests we've invited in. Ken Adamo, the Chief Strategy Officer. I don't know if a frenemy is the right term with Ken. Formerly with DAT. And look, a definite frenemy is Dr. Jason Miller will be with us. Gotta figure out what we're going to argue about today. Stay with us.
The drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and crews who keep the world moving deserve tools that work as hard as they do. That's what Samsara builds, technology for safer, more efficient operations, made with the people who do the work. Samsara, built with operators for operators. Learn more at samsara.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
All right, welcome back to FreightWaves Today. It is a time for Sonar. We're going to break down the data for you, what we're seeing in the market, because this is what we do here at FreightWaves. All of the data that you're seeing is available on Sonar for subscribers. A lot of ways to get that. There's a core Sonar platform, gosonar.com.
Yes.
But you can also get our mobile app. If you're a driver and you're trying to figure out what's happening, you could download the mobile app right on the iOS store. It's Sonar Blue to Blue. We also have something called Market Monitor. Market Monitor is for the executive level summaries of what's happening in the market. And then if you're quoting loads and you want a second source, you want to check, just quote unquote spot check your own activity, you can get our quick rates product. So all of those are different options.
Yep.
I think every
They're all self-serve
executive should
other than the
have
enterprise package.
the Market
So
Monitor. Go ahead.
They're all self-serve other than the enterprise package. So really quick and easy to just sign up on your own, put in a credit card, do a monthly subscription or an annual subscription. You can see all of those at gosonar.com/packages to compare the different options.
Yeah, so it's great. Look, every executive should know what's happening. The data's right there on GoSonar. Like, you should have it. This is your industry, people.
Yeah, and it also has news and research.
It is. The research is
that's
amazing.
Great.
So we've covered everything from GLP-1s. We've covered the industrial build-out, the AI data centers, what happened with fuel, covered all of the earnings roundup. It's about time to publish that one again.
It is, yeah. I was waiting on 2 or 3 more, but we might go ahead and
close
push it
to
out
getting,
and just
we do it every
amend
quarter. We go through 72 companies. We highlight and rank them based on bullish to bearish. Last time it was Prologis was the most bullish, the big warehouse operator, and the most bearish was Wabash Trailer. So I want to see how they stack up. I'm sure you've tracked it.
I mean, we're going to have to talk about railroads and
the railroads are
performing.
bullish, right? That's great.
All right, but today I thought we would start by talking about an index that we haven't talked about much. This is our Sonar Truckload lead time index.
So let's just before we go into that, let's describe what this is. So lead time, Sonar tender lead time, is how far in advance a tender happens before the load picks up. So it's looking at appointment date and time and determining in advance. So if I send something 4 days in advance, it's a 4-day lead tender time. If it's 1 day in advance, it's a 1-day tender lead time. It's looking at the record and request for when that load will pick up. And we've been tracking this stuff for years. A lot of times it's not that interesting to me. I don't refer to the data that often unless there's a major change.
We're going to make it interesting today, though.
But I want to go in and talk about what is happening here, Julie.
So what's happening now is that we're seeing that we're at this 3.71 days for tender.
Oh, sorry. I am. You've set this up. Yes.
For today, currently.
By the way,
This is
we're in
seasonality.
August.
So we're in August.
Yes.
And really what we've seen is over the last 6 years that we've been tracking it, tender lead times have continued to get longer. Now, of course, there are longer.
That's the holidays.
That's the holidays. You pre-ship, right? Like people push stuff off the dock before the end of the year, before the holidays. They're getting stuff out and getting their loads tendered. But what we can see is for this time of year, when there's usually seasonality where there's not as much lead time, we're seeing more of it.
So what's interesting is
there's
year,
two reasons.
So you had, you basically had the whole sort of end of July drop off in August and bottoming. But this year it's got a little bit of went up a little bit in the month of July, but not really a significant. End of month always has some
didn't come down
volatility.
as much as that
Didn't come
did.
down. It stayed
Right.
high, stayed elevated. What's going on there?
So I think there's two reasons. I think that one, I think supply chains are getting more sophisticated. People are getting better at forecasting and can do lead times further out. Two, I think shippers are beginning to retender at new contract rates. Contract loads generally have more lead time than spot. Obviously, the more rejections there are, the closer you're getting to the actual pickup date by the time a carrier accepts it. And then I think third, people are not in a rush for their inventory, so they're going ahead and tendering it. And we're seeing that with the
Especially if
more
you're doing
elongated peak as well as intermodal conversions.
We've heard multiple guests have talked about the fact that peak season or the movement of product towards peak is happening earlier this year. Shippers are planning because they know just capacity's been tight. They're planning more time. The other thing that may be happening is the fact that if I know that capacity is tightening and I know that I've been getting a lot more rejections and carriers are reconfiguring their network, I would rather send those loads a day in advance or 2 days in advance, get the rejections and then plan on number 2 and number 3 and number 4. And what you can see right now, if we look at it, we're at 3.71 days. These are days in advance. They're actual calendar days, not business days. And
that's just through August, right? So when you see any of those other numbers being higher, that's because at the end of the
holidays,
year,
you have Thanksgiving is always a couple days in advance. You have Christmas and New Year's always a little bit in advance. Right here, Labor Day is a bit in advance. So you do see holidays drive it, but what's interesting is just the fact that if you go back where we were just a couple of years ago, I mean, last year we were hovering at about, 3.5, now we're at 3.71. But if you go back to 2024 and 24 and 23, you were, look down here, you were as low as 3.25 days.
Yeah, and when you average out the last 3 years, with last year being longer lead times, we're still up, from an average of 3.65 up to this point in the year to 3.7.
These are tenders that tend to be contracted freight or freight that's in your relationship freight. So you could get some spot opportunities, but it's still the relationships you've already established, not stuff that is typically just going to on a load board type stuff.
Yeah. And I think that I wanted to also show the maps, and I wanted to just pull out a specific region to really kind of talk through this concept. So this is the tender lead time for St. Louis. So you can see it's at 3.42 days, just a little under.
Look at 7.53 out in West Texas.
Yes. So you can see St. Louis. It's a little under the average. Pretty close to the average.
That's that whole oil patch. That's all of the oil, so you're pumping.
So longer
You get a
lead
lot
times.
of lead time. It's Amarillo, Lubbock, Odessa, Abilene. Look at right here, Cheyenne. Is that sort of like eastern Wyoming, Nebraska. I guess it's Nebraska right there, right?
Yes, because Lincoln, Nebraska.
So that's sort of like Wyoming, Nebraska. Some longer lead time. It's a lot of mining out there. Mining probably very much like oil, kind of like creates longer lead times.
Yeah, but I wanted to compare the lead times in a specific market to the actual tender rejection index too, because it very often is a indicator, right? So those lead times in St. Louis we saw were a little bit below average. They're shorter lead times than we're seeing in other parts of the country, which makes perfect sense because tender rejections out of St. Louis are higher than most of the country. They're at 27.6%. We know the national average is more in that 13.5%. So it makes perfect sense. One is in many cases sort of a precursor of the other. Where it gets interesting is when tender rejections, volumes, spot rates, and lead times don't always align. And I think that that's a really, really cool thing to do, to use these lead times to really give more context to what you're looking at. So I dug into Atlanta for just for the most recent past 3 months, and then we'll look at just 2 weeks. So you can see that tender rejections are up a bit over the last 7 days. When you average last week, the prior week, and then average last week, they're actually not up. They're down a little bit. They're when you look at 2 weeks, they're down a bit. Moderately tight market, strong tightening. However, spot rates are not going up in this case at all. Tender volumes are going up. So this gives you really good context if you take it a step further and you compare the last 2 weeks looking at rejection rates, which is purple, tender lead time, which is yellow, and then the overall volume trends. So you can see that volume out of Atlanta is up 3.5%, but tender rejections are only up 2%. Another lever that shippers can pull is increasing that lead time, right? To get that freight accepted, tender it early if you think the market is beginning to tighten. So you can see that the lead time is up 2.4%, and rejections really have not.
Because they have more time.
Rejections have not gone down in that market.
I have an extra day to deal with it. I can deadhead trucks into that market.
That's right.
That's what happens in these early part of a recovery. Like, we're not in a recovery from where we were last year, but in terms of this down cycle that we've seen, you're starting to move towards that Labor Day peak. Atlanta, these big markets start to pick up because now the retailers are thinking, okay, I need to move freight from my distribution centers. Atlanta's got an enormous distribution center network out to my sort of regional points. And so we'll start to see these bigger markets pick up. They'll sort of, like magnets, soak up all the capacity. And then over time, that's when you start to see rates move. But they won't move until they sort of soaked up the capacity that's near them.
Yeah, that's why I thought lead times were an interesting thing to talk about today, because it is, like I mentioned, another lever that shippers can pull. We haven't seen, even with volumes being up pretty significantly in Atlanta, those spot rates aren't coming up yet.
Yeah.
And we're not seeing rejection rates rise.
But it also seems much more orderly. I think the other thing that I would take from the fact that rates are not going up, tender rejections are calming down, if you will, or have been. As you mentioned, tender lead times we've added, half a day.
Yeah, and we've added more than that in Atlanta specifically. So
I think it just means that shippers are aware and they're planning further in advance. They're trying to lean on contracted carriers and
that helps them control their
providers.
costs. Yes.
And it just tells us that this market, I would describe this market as incredibly orderly. I've used the word Goldilocks. I think every broker at every motor carrier would love to see this massive surge in rates. We're not seeing surge of rates, surge in tender rejections. But the fact that we're at elevated tender rejections where we were over the last couple of years, and rates are still near record highs.
Contract rates are continuing to go up.
The contract rates are going up. That's actually a really good environment. You have an orderly tightness. And I think that's a real solid thing. What we don't want to do is get so hyperbolic in terms of super high surges of rates and really strong economic conditions where it creates a massive increase in capacity. I think this actually feels a little bit more orderly and probably invites the fact that this cycle may go on longer. I mean, one of the longest cycles that we ever saw was from 2009 to 2014. That was an upcycle the entire time. That's 5 years. That went on much longer, but it was very slow.
It was 3%.
Orderly, yeah.
3%,
which is honestly
3%,
great. If
right?
you're running assets, that's a great environment. And if you're a shipper, it's predictable. Predictability is a good thing. That may be where we're at.
One last thought on tender lead times. So we have a tool in Sonar. It's really actually part of our broker toolkit, but it's Coverage Guide. If I were a shipper and I was thinking about lead times and thinking about how to manage costs as rejections change, I would absolutely be using this as an indicator. What's really cool about it is it shows you the current condition and what's happening, right? So, for example, this New Jersey outbound, tightening, currently tight. Act now. I would be tendering that immediately. However, if you're looking at some of these other markets, outbound New York, outbound Pennsylvania, outbound Illinois, showing currently tight, but loosening. So I would
guidance to tell you.
Yeah, and the guidance shows you specifically that it is in Words for Brokers, since this is part of our broker toolkit. But there's this condition. So those where it's where it's currently tight but loosening, if you have time before the pickup date, I would sit on them. especially if you're not going to be able to tender them at contract rates. If you think that they're going to go out at spot and you think that, and you know that market is going to be loosening, no reason to have tender lead time that's that far in advance.
To cover it.
Yeah.
And I think it's important if you're a broker or someone that's a shipper and you're thinking about, okay, I want to cover quick because I may this market make it tighter and harder and more expensive. This will give you the guide on what we're seeing in the data that tells us whether our market's tightening or loosening. And loosening means you can wait to the end of the day. I think what's always interesting is if you walk into a lot of brokers that are sort of inexperienced, they always take the harder ones later in the day, which is really a bad move. You want to deal with the harder ones, the tightening markets early.
Yeah.
Because those are the ones, the loosening guys.
If you're going to lose a little bit of money on it in the beginning of the day, you're going to lose a lot of money on it.
Rates can move 20, 30. I mean, there's times where you could see a double of the rate, like literally in a couple hours.
That's right.
As that market gets
so overall takeaway is lead time is one more lever that shippers should be using. It provides more context when you're looking at what's happening in the market. And then also, it is another sort of outlet or lever that shippers can use to manage rejections and in some cases costs.
And I think the difficulty number as well right here just tells you how difficult, how tight. Looks like the Dayton, New Jersey, didn't even know that New Jersey had a Dayton, to Saxonburg, Pennsylvania. Then this is somebody's, basically, they uploaded their own routing guides.
Specific loads, yeah.
Loads. And essentially that one lane is a 9 to cover. So interesting that New Jersey to Pennsylvania is a short haul. A real short lane, but it does tell you that it's tighter than it should be.
Yeah. So
360 miles. So.
That's it. Pay attention to lead time is what I would say with our Sonar update. We are going to hear from
Ken Adamo,
we're going to
frenemy of FreightWaves. And
we're going to hear our verified segment from Highway. Then we're going to take a quick break and be back with Ken. We're keeping up with the latest developments in an FBI investigation we mentioned in the headlines. The FBI is asking truck drivers nationwide to come forward if they think they're victims in a 54-count tax fraud case. Prosecutors say a Georgia accounting firm, Genuine Financial Services, collected payroll and tax money from trucking clients but never sent it to the IRS. The owner, Diane Marie Poe, was indicted this week. All charges remain allegations. Anyone who used the company is asked to contact FBI Atlanta. And in Canada, border officers seized nearly 6.6 million Canadian dollars in vapes and nicotine pouches from 3 separate U.S. semis in just 4 days. All three loads came through the Blue Water Bridge between Port Huron, Michigan, and Ontario. CBSA says the investigation is ongoing and no charges have been announced. Our Fraud Watch segment, Verified, is brought to you by Highway.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. We will get to Ken Adamo later in the show. He is a frenemy of the state here at FreightWaves. Excited to have him back. But let's talk about Tesla Semi, because this is really another polarizing conversation in terms of the trucking community. To talk about what we're seeing right on the ground, someone who's actually experienced the Tesla Semi, we have Intercoastal Trucking's Bob Lewis is going to tell us all about their experience with the Tesla Semi. Bob, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. So a little bit about Intercoastal, 100 trucks, 600 trailers. You guys are a Northeast-based carrier. You've gone out and you are in the process of implementing Tesla Semis, or you're test driving them. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we're 57 years in business, truckload carrier in the Northeast, and we go on some of the hardest corridor deliveries, places to deliver there is. So we wanted to see if this Tesla truck is really something that is going to work here in the areas that we specifically deliver to, the markets we go to, hard deliveries, and so right now we're in a 2-week demo for this truck. So we're still demoing it. Actually, the truck was out this morning, and so we're getting a good feel of what the truck can do in our market. So it's been kind of neat because I can actually, on my phone, I can actually watch every day what this truck is doing. Right now, you can see it's charging. The temperature inside the cab is 84 degrees. And so I can watch, how this thing moves during the day, what speed it's going, pretty much just everything, how much power it's using. And it's been something just to watch it, even from my perspective, when the driver's in the cab, and just what I can see here from my desk.
So what made you decide that you wanted to run this demo in your operation? What made you want to be on the forefront of working with Tesla and autonomous trucking?
So great question. We were approached by a customer that that's very concerned, like most companies, about zero emissions. So of course, the electric truck has zero emissions, and we have a customer that wanted to partner with us, and would we be interested? And of course, we were interested, and we got hooked up with the Tesla folks, and we got the demo. They actually brought a truck up here once for a dog and pony show, and there's the picture right there. You can see it next to our 71 white. So there's quite a difference in technology, and from a 71 to for what you're seeing there on the screen. So that was up here for just a dog and pony show in our yard, and we were able to take it on the road and experience the demo. Now they actually brought two of our drivers down to the facility, and we did an orientation from like 10 in the morning till 1 o'clock to really go over the truck. There's the motor right there. There's actually 3 motors on the truck, so it's I don't want to be a commercial for Tesla, but I can tell you how it's worked for us. So
Bob, it's got
that's how we got
California plates. It looks like, again, the screens that we're looking at are small, but it looks like California plates on that. Is that your vehicle or the vehicle they've loaned you with California tags, or is this just like a file of a picture?
Yeah, this is the vehicle that we're using, the California plates. Again, we're just demoing the truck, so it's not our vehicle. We won't see vehicles on site here till 2027. Gotcha.
So let's talk a little bit about the feedback that I hear and go through each of these, because you're on X, I believe. We've talked a few times on there. Drivers love to hate the Tesla Semi. So how are your drivers reacting to it?
So we had 2 drivers on this, or currently doing it. We had one that is kind of doing a shuttle operation, and then we had one that is doing more of kind of the work we do, like maybe 180-mile length of haul type of thing. So they each had 2 different perspectives. So the shuttle guy, who does more of a stop and go type of thing, he was very happy with the acceleration, the quietness of the cab, how smooth it ran, the visibility. The visibility is I have to say, it's a huge safety thing. I'm going to put it up. If you can see the visibility, the windows. So the driver actually sits in the middle of the truck, and then he has all that visibility to see. Usually you get those guys coming in on the side trying to get ahead of the truck. These windows, with the driver sitting so far up in the truck, he gets great visibility. And the cameras that they have have been fantastic. The drivers really started to learn about the camera. So this experience I think the drivers came in with a little PTSD for driving the truck, and as they experienced it more, they really got to like it more. And the biggest thing to get used to is probably being in the center of the truck. So not being on the left side of the truck. They always find themselves compensating where they are in the lane to, compared to where they are on the left side of the truck. But again, after being in the truck just for a day or so, that kind of seems to go away. So, so that was the local guy. I can tell you about what the other guy experienced if you want me to go into that.
Yeah, we'd love
to hear it, and how the battery range held up on those longer.
So we had the other guy who does more of the length of haul. We did not the shuttle arrangement we have with the customer. So his first day, we actually threw him to the dogs. So he picked up in Paterson, New Jersey. We took him out to Astoria, Queens. Okay, so and then when he got into Astoria, Queens, it was a tight delivery, so we wanted to see how that handled. And actually, the turning radius reported back was fine from the driver. So, of course, we got to that stop, and they said, half the stuff on the truck, we needed to go to Long Island now. So, again, not planned for, but this is trucking. So the driver's like, oh, geez, now I got to go to Long Island. So, and we did it. We did it, and we wound up coming back into back over the Cross Bronx Expressway. And I know this truck had a lot of media coverage with the Donner Pass. Well, If you've never been on the Cross Bronx Expressway at rush hour, it makes the Donner Pass seem like a cakewalk. And so it was quite a day. And actually, one of the keys to the truck is the regenerative braking. So every time you hardly touch the brake, the motor slows you down enough where it brakes the truck automatically. And actually, when it brakes the truck, it repowers the battery while it's doing that. So this driver on the 180 length of haul, or the kind of what we really do, he was more of said that the truck has to be managed. So that was his first take. So he was more of a manage the truck. So because we had him out another day where he actually pressed the battery charge and almost didn't get back. So he found that he had to again manage the truck by using more of the cruise control. The regenerative braking is definitely a thing. Maybe laying off the brake and let the truck do the work. And Tesla's been really great. They were coaching my guys like you actually had to get back. So it's definitely been a learning experience.
So Bob, I have an electric car that I drive, and I love it, by the way, for local around town. I've talked about this a few times. I went to Salt Lake City and rented the exact same car in an internal combustion because it's a BMW and they make both the electric version and the internal combustion version. And I was grossly disappointed with the acceleration in the internal combustion version because I gotten so used to the electric that you notice it immediately. It's quieter, it's smoother. Electric is amazing around town. But I'll tell you, I've told this story on air before, is going away from Chattanooga to Nashville, Atlanta, which we occasionally do. It's about 2 hours away. We're right in the center of both cities. That's when the problems start because the range, even though when I bought the car, they said it would get 300 miles. That isn't true. It gets about 230, 240. But I was going from Nashville a couple of weekends ago. I took my daughters up to the American Doll store in Nashville. We were on the way back. I thought I had enough range, but by the time we got back about 30 miles away, and the whole time I was watching it, I started to lose range and I wasn't going to make it home. Luckily, there was a charger on my route home, but I planned that I would have enough time. And according to my car, it said I would have enough time, but it was hot. We're through the mountains. It just didn't know. That strikes me as the biggest knock that Tesla's going to have. I am interested and intrigued by the fact that the drivers are enjoying the higher visibility because sitting in the middle always felt weird to me. I'm not a driver, but that was sort of the big thing. It felt different. Seems like that's not the issue. It's the range that's going to be the problem.
So that's a great point. So the truck we had, the range is supposed to be 525 miles. That's the long range truck. And they're making another truck that has a smaller range, a lesser range of 325. We haven't seen 525. Again, I think it's a lot of managing it. We weren't getting 525. So, so what your point is, so right now with it has to be more on predictable runs. So, if we're looking in our network or what is the predictable run? So exactly, you just can't run as far as like you did with your car. And we just can't send this thing to Massachusetts from Jersey and think we're going to get back and just hope we're going to get back. So it's predictable runs at this point. The infrastructure for the charging is simply not there, especially, it may be out west. I know it's a little better, but here, the only place we can charge this truck right now is in Elizabeth, New Jersey. So there's no place to even charge it in the Lehigh Valley where we do a lot of our running. So we've been kind of splitting it between both drivers, the Jersey driver and the Pennsylvania driver, just to get it back for charging. So charging is a problem. However, with that said, our facility here is an old Formica plant. When Formica was all the rage in like the late 80s and 90s, and we have a ton of power coming in this facility, and we can handle a mega charger. So there is savings. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that this truck makes us money. So it's all nice to be out there, looking pretty. And believe me, the drivers are getting, people are just honking the horn, and every place they go, it's like a spaceship pulling in, and it's amazing. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't make money for us, it doesn't make any sense. And there is considerable savings in the maintenance side and then the fuel side.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was talking to somebody that works with car dealers, and the car dealers are telling consumers not to buy electric, frankly, because of the fact that they're not having to go to the shop that often. So since I've had my electric car, I've had it 3 years, the only thing I've ever had to deal with is tires, which is actually far worse, by the way. I'm curious. You don't know this because you haven't owned this, but I am curious what this will do on the tires, because I know in my car, of course, weight you've always had to contend with, but this is a heavier vehicle than your traditional diesel truck. I am curious what that means for the tires, because my electric car eats up tires. It's just a problem. And it's something that I've had to deal with. I had to replace them. I've only owned the car for 3 years. 4 sets of tires. 4 sets of tires in 3 years.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Insane. Because the only drawback I see, but I like the acceleration.
Yeah, I can't speak to the tires because we haven't had it long enough. But there's no engine here. These are motors. There's no oil. There's no filters. There's no transmission. There's no turbocharger. There's no DPF. There's no there's no DEF system. So the maintenance figure, it definitely is very enticing. The tires, I've heard the same thing, but the maintenance feature is definitely a savings. And I think downtime, people don't really measure downtime, but I think the downtime on this could really, there's maybe little downtime. So, I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have a truck down for a week waiting for parts or whatever. And it's expensive to be in the shop. Even if it's warranty stuff, it takes a long time. So, just in downtime alone, saving downtime could really help. And between the maintenance and the fuel, I mean, we're looking at probably maybe 65 cents per mile.
Wow,
savings.
Huge. And only if you could get the range. I mean, Lehigh Valley to Newark is 3 hours away. I mean, you're talking about if you have a problem, you're hours away from the nearest. And the difference is a car, there are charging stations, but they're sparse. They're not they never seem to be where you need them to be as somebody owns an electric car. We're talking about a totally different powertrain and level of charging. You can't just pull up to your community. First of all, it wouldn't even fit at the grocery store or the bank that has charging. But the other issue is you need a supercharger to charge these vehicles. Am I right on that?
Yeah. Well, there's 2 types of charging. There's what they have. Tesla specific has a mega charger, which we actually could install here at our facility, and that'll charge in 20 minutes. So the charge that we're doing in Elizabeth, New Jersey, that's an 8-hour charge, as I call a 2.0 charge, and that's a longer charge. And so, we're down 8 or 10 hours to charge that thing back up to, up to 96%. So, so that's. But with the Tesla Mega Charger, you're talking 20 minutes. So there's just no infrastructure right now in this area. Although Tesla says it's coming on stream, they're going to put these things in truck stops. All through Pennsylvania here and New Jersey. So they seem to be making a big play. I think it's going to be a thing here. I think a lot of customers are very interested in it. I've other customers that I'm not even doing business with, that they know that we're demoing this truck, are reaching out to me and say, hey, maybe we should be doing some business together because we're very interested in zero emissions. So I think it is a thing. So as a business, we're very interested in providing this for customers that are asking for it.
I think it's cool. I mean, I know there's a lot of opinion on them. I think, look, it looks cool. It's a beautiful truck. I love technology. I love the fact that on your phone you can track your device. It's amazing. But there's the practical application. Real quick, do you think that this is something that you would adopt in your fleet?
100%. We're looking to take on 5 trucks next year for this predictable shuttle. It's a predictable run. It's an 8-mile run. We do 6,000 loads a year from a manufacturing plant down to a co-packer, and it's a lot of loads, and we could definitely manage the charging with that. just because we're just going to run 8 miles and wouldn't need to charge every night. So for that predictable run, 100%. I think we'll make money, we'll save money, and the customer's going to get what they want for the zero emissions. No tailpipe exposure with
I think
carbon.
it's cool, Julie. Yeah. I think it's just so cool, and I love the innovation. And look, I never bet against Elon Musk.
Totally, that's what
at the end of the day, that's what you love him or hate him. You shouldn't bet against him. So too many people have tried that and lost a lot of money.
Thank you, Bob, so much.
Bob, really appreciate it. Keep us up to date as you look at these 4 or 5 trucks or 6 trucks, whatever it is that you're implementing. Keep us up to date in terms of what you're doing. We'd love to hear how they're working practically in the field. Really appreciate you coming on FreightWaves Today. We'll be right back. We got Ken Adamo. He is the Chief Strategy Officer of Ease Logistics. Come tell us what the state of freight looks like. Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. It is again a Monday, and we're rocking and rolling over here. We have Ken Adamo. He is now the Chief Strategy Officer of Ease Logistics, a man that is on top of the data. Ken, what are you seeing right now? You are on. There you are.
Not a lot of freight. That's what we're seeing. This is the slowest Monday this year, maybe.
Are you surprised by that?
Maybe I am, and I shouldn't have been. Right? I think a good way to explain this by folks smarter than me is that we should have probably expected a harder seasonal rebound, given how probably overbought things were prior to the 4th. So maybe we should have expected a little bit more. It's a late Labor Day this year. We've got another 2 weeks of August basically to go before Labor Day. So I think we probably aren't going to see much troughing of the market until then. But I think I'm not surprised with where rates are. I'm a little bit more surprised at the lack of volume that's out there at the moment to go get.
Do we think it's from your perspective, is this a seasonal calendar issue, or you think there's something more structural that you're concerned about?
I think it's probably just like a little bit of a difference in how you and I think about where we are currently. I don't see the demand being as strong through this entire cycle. I think a lot of this is on the supply side. Maybe it's if I had to just peg it, maybe 70% capacity side, 30% demand side has been what's been driving this. So I think that's what you'd expect when the capacity comes back. You're seeing net adds of motor carriers start to ramp back up. New truck orders are way up. So I think without substantive demand, you tend to see things fall off harder after a road check week or seasonally. So I think that's part of it. I also think like the repricing effort, this doesn't get talked about a lot, probably for good reason, but I think the contract repricing effort happened so swiftly where shippers wanted to get things settled before peak that's pulling volume out of the spot market as routing guides. I'm sure you're seeing it in the tender rejection data. Routing guides start to stabilize as those repricing efforts went through.
We talked about it earlier on our Sonar update. Julie and I did about tender lead times are up half a day. Like it's something that's, if you look at it over the last couple of years, the lead time that we've been tracking, if you go back to a couple of years ago, it was 3.25 days on average before a load picks up. It's now 3.75. You'd see that it's up, and it didn't drop like it has in historically. So it does tell us that shippers are planning a little bit further. And look, we talked to a lot of people on the show, and everyone has talked about how early shippers are planning for peak season. They're moving freight in systemically. They're moving it in very orderly. Intermodal is surging, and last week we actually talked about the fact that intermodal, you take the delta in our tender data, and you took the quantity that is, in fact, it's almost like obvious when you look at it from that perspective. Zach Strickland had a great article on this, is that intermodal has picked up a lot of traffic. And a lot of it's intermodal on the eastern side of the United States. Like we're intermodal records in the railroad, according to the railroad data, but it's a different part of the country than you typically see intermodal, which is west to east. It's really that center, Atlanta and Chicago.
Yeah, I'd be surprised Harrisburg would be. I wouldn't be surprised if they were near the top of that list too. Just like rocking and rolling that Harrisburg, Jersey, Maryland corridor heading west to Chicago to be then dispersed. We're seeing e-com, through our shippers and through Spot, pretty hot right now.
Yeah,
which I think what you'd expect, right? I mean, I think why would you want to risk given the spring that you probably had? If you look to your left and you look to your right as a shipper, actuarially speaking, one of them was probably let go with the budget overruns in the spring. So why would you expose yourself if you didn't need to? And intermodal always rocks and rolls when fuel, and it's probably like a double whammy, right? 'Cause intermodal is always
Delta is 34% for contract intermodal. And the railroads we've talked about it. We actually asked the railroads why have they not increased the rates? They're almost on the contract rates have not moved hardly at all. And what they'll tell you is that this is a gain share. I think some of it, Julie, we haven't talked about this, is some of it is the two big NS and UP want to get approval by the federal government. I think they may be playing a little bit more cautious in terms of rate increases this season than maybe they would be otherwise, because they don't want to piss off a bunch of shippers that would then go out and sort of declare that they shouldn't merge.
Yeah, I agree.
They never said that, by the way.
No, but that's what I would do. I'd be sitting back quietly, picking up market share without making any noise about raising rates.
That
doesn't allow the other guys to raise their rates either. So
34% delta, you just have to run a train. You're going to pick up freight. You don't have to work that hard. In fact, Travis Kellenet, there's a great video he did in a podcast. He's the founder of Uber. I think his line was something, I tweeted it. His line was effectively that strategy in transportation is all about pricing.
Yep.
Like 100% of transportation strategy is pricing. It's a quote that I hadn't thought about, but he's like, all forms of transportation are driven. Pricing drives everything. We all know that. But it was a great quote. And it was, it's obviously true in the passenger transportation world. It's true in our world. Yeah. But anyways.
So Ken, I want to go back to what you were saying a little bit earlier about contract rates and routing guides holding up. I think you're absolutely right. I think we've heard from so many of our guests and others that we've talked to that there was a massive amount of mini bids. Contract rates are rising. Shippers were working to quickly get new contract rates in place that would hold up on their routing guides. But so I agree with you wholeheartedly there. But do you really think capacity is entering the market? I just can't wrap my head around new entrants coming in and being sustainable with all of the new liability and regulation that we're seeing. And who is tendering freight to these new carriers that don't have MC numbers or safety ratings yet?
That last part I don't have a good answer for. It's just not my area of expertise. I think there's ways that capacity comes in, right? If you come on as a driver, let's say you were swinging a hammer over the summer and you come on to drive for a fleet that has a 5-year-old authority. I mean, you're just going to add capacity to an already existing carrier. I'm just not as bullish, about, I think like when you look at just the timing of midterms and like this administration's ability to kind of have stick-wittedness through things, I think like if you purging capacity out of the market is only one side of the equation. It's like the extent to which you're going to prevent that capacity that you purged from coming back. Maybe not the exact same folks or the exact same mechanisms, but the fact that this industry since 1980 has had this whipsaw cycle because capacity exits because the rates aren't sustainable. The rates become much higher. They become extremely attractive. They pull capacity that otherwise wouldn't think about coming into the market, and that drives rates down, right? That is the coyote curve, the picket line, whatever you want to call it. And so when you look at it that way, I don't see any way. The RXO curve. Coyote curve has such a better ring. I think they just call it the curve now.
By RXO.
But by RXO, by Coyote, by Chris Pickett. But in all seriousness, like I understand all of like the reasons why you might not believe it. But like also I don't believe a reason why capacity wouldn't come back. Like it has to come back. Like these rates will be tolerated.
But I do think this time it is different. Yes, capacity is always.
Let me make my case, and then Dr. Miller is going to rebuttal this later in the show. But let me make my case. It's all driver employment. It's all driver availability. Owner operators are a piece of that as well. But here's the reason that I think the cycle goes on longer, is that even if you look at the transportation jobs, they didn't move since February. John Kingston has reported this. So if there is new capacity coming in, it's not coming from the bigger fleets. We've interviewed, I think we're now at 70 CEOs. Not all of them, maybe half of them are not from the logistics side. Some of them, maybe more, a little bit more. But the point is that no one is talking about adding drivers. We've talked to the largest public carriers, and they're like, we can't get drivers even if we wanted to add them at the current pay structure. So where is this capacity coming from? Private fleets aren't adding. If there's new capacity, it's got to come from the smallest carriers. Tom Albrecht at Reliance Partners suggests that a lot of the registrations, because we see this, you can see it in the FMCSA data, post-MODIS, we have it inside of Sonar, there have been a surge of new registrations. However, what Tom Albrecht says is those are basically banked. These are nefarious actors that believe they're going to get cut off of new registrations. They're banking MC numbers. They're banking registration numbers. They know that at some point that party's going to end. And if you have a questionable rating or an unsatisfactory rating, you can't get freight. So they're going out and registering whole new carriers. That's what he believes is driving it. But in the data, where are all these drivers supposedly coming from?
I'll go back to a lesson I learned, which was, I think it was 2 years ago. I was sitting on a panel with some really smart people, Lee Klasko, others. And everyone was talking about how the last two cycles you kind of have to discard because it was COVID and then it was ELD/Trump tax cuts. And it's hard to imagine, like, what could you possibly pull out of the rabbit out of the hat that's going to drive a cycle similar to those two? And I think someone said something, I don't remember who it was, that stuck with me, which is, I don't know what it's going to be, but I find it hard to believe that we're just going to go in a diminishing amplitude moving forward, right? Where like no one was talking about English. This was like year and a half, 2 years before ELP or non-domicile became a thing. In fact, I think Biden was still in office. And so this thought was like, even if you don't know what it's going to be, is this sense that the market that is becoming predictably increasingly more volatile, and the cycles are becoming a higher frequency and a higher amplitude. Is it reasonable to believe that something isn't going to happen that's going to drive that into?
But I would agree that the cycle eventually would correct. I've said this. I've heard this my whole life. Like, been growing up as a trucking brat, a nepo baby. Use your term. I learned, my dad would come home and I would, we would attend business dinners because that's what you do as a son of a founder. Is you're listening to people talk trucking. It's the reason it's in my blood. And I would hear about this cycle is different. And I've said this before, is that no cycle is going to just stay indefinitely, even if you have a quote unquote super cycle. The question is when. When does the cycle turn? And my personal view is that it's really driven by driver availability. We did see last week that the states, the federal government and states are now in a lawsuit. I think it's 27 states. I don't know if I have that number correctly, but a large number of the blue states are suing the federal government saying that you can't do some of this more aggressive action around non-domiciled CDLs. I think the case that the Supreme Court has even where they weren't expected, they stood on the side of safety. You could argue that Montgomery was a safe, the Supreme Court signaled that they are safety first. And I think that ultimately, again, something Matt Leffler and I talked about, is it looks like the federal government will probably win this battle. And I don't know, Ken, I understand that the administration, specifically Donald Trump himself, may not, has as many ways tacoed. I don't know that that's the case in DOT or FMCSA. Having talked to bars and having talked close to the DOT, I don't see the case that they're going to ease up.
But even if it goes 2 years, I mean, you're going to get an administration change.
Well,
I think the pressure that you feel, right, is like, I don't think shippers will bear this pressure indefinitely, right? Like, I think if this stays and you're looking at 10 double digit, let's just call it double digit contract rate increases for a foreseeable period of time over the next 2 to 3 years, I think you'll see pressure start to burst out of the sides. And I don't know if that'll be lowering the driving age to 18. I don't know if that'll be changing the hours of service. I don't know if that'll be tweaking speed limits. I just think like there will be pressure to get around this blockage. And I don't know if it'll be rolling back ELDs or ELP or non-dom. I think you can easily see a situation where the ACLU or some large civil rights organization takes up a case post midterms in a lame duck administration to really, with strong financial support, go after this. But I just don't see a world where like you've had basically 20 years absent prolonged trucking inflation, because it's a cyclical cycle and it always kind of resets back to where it started at minimal accretive jumping off points. I just find it hard to believe that we don't find some way to get more drivers into the market.
I've talked to a number of major shippers, I know you have as well, and I had dinner with somebody who used to be a large asset carrier, was at one of the largest asset carriers, worked around this space, now manages one of the largest supply chains in, call it building materials, and that's as far as I'll go, because he doesn't want to be outed, so I'm not going to do it. His comment to me was, because we were talking about these cycles, he's been around trucking for at least 40 years, and we were talking about just how like insignificant, he's running a $40 billion corporations. He's the number 2 guy at this whole company, but he happens deep roots in our industry. And what he told me was he's like, this stuff just isn't that important to us at the corporate level. He's like, it's important to the traffic managers, it's important to the transportation department, but when we look at all the things that we have to deal with at corporate, we just don't care that much. He's like, I know you live it and breathe it every day. I care about it because I used to be in it, but in terms of all the things that we could be doing as a company, I know years ago, this was a couple years ago, Julie, I don't even know if you were here, but Sonar had a major company that spends about, total about $4 to $5 billion on total logistics. We were able to demonstrate we could save them $50 million. And they agreed that we could save, not we, but the data demonstrated where they could save $50 million. And they wanted to do the deal, but it took 2 years to get it through. And the response was, by the finance department was, we have other things that are bigger priorities. And you're like, it's $50 million, but it's 1% of the overall supply chain budget. And I would say, Ken, we've talked about this before, is that as it relates to consumer prices, a couple percent, I think maybe, so where's the pressure going to come? The FMCSA, they would tell you this straight up. The only parties that they regulate are trucking companies. That's their constituents. And they've said this on stage, is the brokers are not who they regulate. They regulate the motor carriers. That's what they're responsibility for, which leaves the brokers in the sort of vague area of no regulation, which has been the benefit to brokers. Now plaintiffs' attorneys feel like that's their job. But where is it going to come from? Congress seems unconcerned. I mean, honestly, theft. You talk about the theft. We did a story earlier today. I mean, Corca is getting stuck in Congress. So if Congress isn't going to change the rules, it's not coming. The FMCSA have no right or don't really care about what the shippers have to say. I mean, really, that's at least the impression I have talking to them. Where's it going to come from? Who's going to demand that is going to demand a change?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my question, my comment earlier. I don't know where it's going to come from. I don't have a good answer of where. I just know that the market is not in equilibrium at the moment, and the market is calling for more trucks, more drivers, basically. Right? The market is calling for more drivers. So the question is, the natural tension is a market that would demand more drivers, right? I won't throw the S word around on your show, but in a short-term basis, I think there's definitely at this present moment a shortage of capacity in many, many markets across the United States.
I agree with you there. I do agree.
Yeah, I was just being cheeky. Yeah,
I know what you're headed with this. Yeah. I didn't want to get. Freight nerd.
Yeah, the macro. The macro. I agree with your shortage thing on the macro. So, but when you look at it, so it's going to either we're going to be in a prolonged period where which we were. I mean, it's not. This could go on for 3 years, and it just naturally, as the economy grows and you just intercept it. So that's how we got out of it, right? The driver pool just attrited over a longer period of time than we expected. Demand was anemic, and they just happened to cross paths last November, whenever you want to call it, last September, October, November. And they started to go back in the other direction before all of the immigration stuff layered fuel on it. So I'm not smart enough. I don't have a crystal ball to know where those drivers are going to come from. I don't have a strong belief that we could go another 24 to 36 months without some material influx of. Now, I think what a lot of groups are hoping for is that influx of capacity. I joke about it on Twitter of the Burt Reynolds effect. You're going to get the suit and tie, not the suit and tie, but the button down shirt, the uniformed driver out on the road making 120 grand a year hauling spot freight. I just,
So let me make a
that's
counter case, Ken, and I appreciate you coming on here. And like one thing I do love about even the post on social media at the peak a couple of months ago was that you always bring facts and you have a perspective, but it's always backed in data, and I always respect it. But let me give you a counterpoint here on why I think there's a different perspective today. Is the parties that moved for deregulation had changed their perspective. I know this because we have been in the middle of this debate about the driver shortage. They've shifted. FreightWaves Today is now being invited into the Lion's Den to broadcast from the events that they host. I'm going to tease that a little bit, where we were sort of blocked, because I think what's happening right now is the larger motor carriers were pushing for deregulation. They were ones that wanted to make it easier for truck drivers, and they realized they went too far. And as we've seen with every period in history, you go back to the 1935 Motor Carrier Act, is there was this movement among the constituents that wanted deregulation, and realized that when you deregulate too heavily, you end up creating an environment where the bad actors end up just proliferating. And you realize, at first you think, oh, I want deregulation, but when you get it, if you're a winner in that market, if you're a larger player, you don't want it, because it means that everyone else that isn't willing to play by any rules is taking advantage of it. By the way, I do think everyone should listen to this Travis Kalanick that's in transportation, this podcast. That is just one of the most fascinating. Let's pull up the tweet, because I just think this is such an interesting quote. Was basically that pricing is the sum of strategy in transportation. I just thought that was a really interesting take from this. But my point on this, he also goes deeply into the taxi unions and how the sort of regulation ended up in the taxi unions, and how once they realized that they could restrict competition, all of the efforts were to restricting competition. And I think when you have the larger carriers that want tighter markets, that want more regulations, they're the ones influencing the lobbyist situations. I think the retailers and the other companies have some influence on transportation, but it's such a low priority, as I understand it from talking to them, that there's so many other things that they're focused on in Congress, that where is Congress as the regulatory body that's going to push it? I don't know. And then I look at the whole structure of the railroads. I mean, the STB. We've interviewed the chair of the STB. They will tell you one of the primary roles of the STB is price stabilization. They want the railroads to make a lot of money. They've said this. They're very public about it, because they believe that if you make a lot of money, you're able to reinvest in safety. So I don't know. That's my case on why these regulatory movement, and then we haven't even talked about the states. The federal government's one side, but the states have a lot to say here too. And we've seen the states go more aggressive on regulation. And so this is going to play out. It's an interesting debate. Julie, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is, I've been pretty consistent with this even back to when I was at DAT, when this all started. It's like, I could see a world where they accidentally re-regulate the trucking industry. And I think it is I don't have too strong of an opinion on a lot of this kind of ancillary, non-pricing, non-brokerage piece, as much as I did anyway. But the one thing I feel strongly for is I don't think there's anything good in here for the small carrier.
Ken, you and I agree there. I mean, we have said that it's not good for this whole Supreme Court decision, the C.H. Robinson, the Lupus Superior lawsuit and verdict. I don't think any of that benefits small carriers.
I think it's massive pressure on brokers, and I think it's incredibly challenging.
I mean, it's not good for the load boards. I know you won't speak to that, but I can. Because ultimately, the issue is that your highest risk is the party you don't know, that first load. And look, there's all games that people play, but that's where the risk is. So Ken, I don't know. It's a really interesting debate. Can we get Jason Miller in here? I see he's in the room. Jason, you want to stay? Ken, do you want to stay for a bit?
I can stay.
All right. Can we put Jason on the screen? Is
Brady
that how's we do it?
Brady
We can't.
Brady Bunch
Production can't do it. There it is. There's Jason. What's that fourth thing? This is not good. I've screwed up the production. Production team is like, oh, Julie's here twice. It's a treat. Look at this.
It's like the Brady Bunch boxes.
My team's like, what is going on, Craig? Stop.
While they work on doing the 4 box.
Yes, we're going to do a 4 box.
You asked me my take.
Yeah.
I think that we saw this massive shift, right? And I think part of it was emotion. I think part of it was all this new regulation. I think part of it was the ELD mandate. I don't know that we're going to see that whipsaw like we saw there, where everything got so tight and timber rejection showed. But I do think that it is going to be a long time that we are in a healthier balance.
Yes.
I don't think the pendulum is going to swing as far as it might have, but I think it is going to stay on the carriers, slightly on the carrier side, and for a little while. We have to see sustained year-over-year rate increases, not just one massive correction.
And they're not
carriers
seeing
to be
it.
able to reinvest in safety and all of the other things that we know the regulation is pushing.
Larger carriers, except in LTL, have not seen the kinds of increases they need to return capital. They just haven't.
Not yet.
The deterioration. But let's talk about, so Dr. Jason Miller is here. We have Ken Adamo that's going to stick around for a second. Ken makes the case that this cycle is not as long as I've argued that it is. Jason, I know you study this. Love to get your take here.
Yeah, so on the employment side, I mean, I will agree with Ken. Rates are high enough that capacity is being incentivized to enter. I'm expecting that looks nothing like the entry we saw in 2018 through mid-2019, and certainly nothing like the entry we saw in really the back half of 21, but especially most of 2022. So I believe that new entry piece, which is your biggest marginal source of capacity in the industry, comes from the creation of new carriers. That's going to be slower than we've seen in prior cycles. Where I'll throw a little bit wrinkle in is the data I look at. I think there's a lot more of a demand side story in terms of why the market has tightened this year compared to a lot of the consensus. And that's because of just this incredible build out of data centers. And I don't think a lot of that freight is really well captured by traditional metrics. Let's say CAS, which just came out and is further down year over year, for example, in July, like 4.5%.
But CAS,
that number just...
Jason, CAS has a higher proportion LTL, which is often missed in the data than it does truckload. I mean, it's a bigger portion, so LTL is consolidating. But continue, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. No, exactly. But this is where I think the demand side is important to look at and where we have to start thinking about what's the Federal Reserve going to be doing this September. I still think they'll be hiking interest rates because the August inflation data, certainly on the producer side, is going to look worse than the July data did. That is a given based on where energy prices are at, just by itself. But we also have, if you look where bond yields are at right now, I mean, the 30-year is now at the highest level it's been since 2007. You've got the 10-year itching up a little bit more. We are in no sort of sign that the Hormuz situation is closer to a resolution. And so what I'm starting to question is how much of a demand runway window do we have? And also, is there any sign that the hyperscalers decide to start scaling back any of the CapEx we're doing? And so in terms of sort of the timing of the market cycle, if you look, typical expansionary cycles last somewhere between 18 months. The COVID cycle was closer to 21 months. And so if we basically, roll back the clock, December of 25 is when the market shifted. That would suggest that we've got some running room maybe into the first part of 2027 here. But if the Fed starts a rate hiking cycle, all bets are off because we saw how quickly the market turned in the back half of 18 into 19. And a lot of that was interest rate driven, and that took out demand from the system. So for me, we're going to have a lot more clarity come September once we see what the Fed does.
So Jason, the demand side is something we've been arguing. We look at the rail data. It's really robust right now, particularly the industrial side, which I think, to your point, is not being captured very well. We were looking at the tender lead data. A lot of this stuff is in the big mining country, big petroleum country, where the data, we're not getting a lot of the sort of tank, the stuff on the Permian Basin and mining trucks are just, the stuff is sort of done in these own proprietary networks, if at all. It's probably just orders and fax machines. But having said that, you're making the case, at least I want to make sure I'm interpreting what you're saying, is that demand is stronger than a lot of folks give it credit because of AI data centers and some of the material gains that we're seeing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look, for example, at, just take even air freight imports, they're up 17% year over year right now. That stuff's then moving expedited truck, that's your computers, your GPUs, all of these things, your electrical goods heading to these facilities. I don't think we have clarity on tenders on data center website or data center construction projects. How much of that is automated versus, again, is going to be more of a pick up the phone, fax type of situation where we may not have as much visibility. But we can see that certain manufacturing sectors like primary metals are up year over year. A lot of that's steel, which is related to data center construction. Electrical goods, switchgear, things like that is up. A lot of machinery is up. We've seen that with Caterpillar's earnings. And so that's where when you start looking at Caterpillar, Eaton, Cummins, all of these heavy equipment manufacturers, especially in the case of Cat and Cummins, saying, hey, we're doing more volume this year than last year. That's where it's hard to square with the idea that freight volumes are down. And so to me, that's where I start asking the question more, is there something coming down the horizon in the next 6 to 9 months that could cause demand to weaken? And I certainly think that there are the concerns there, especially if the Fed does raise interest rates, because the rate hiking cycle has historically resulted in a material drop in trucking demand within 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, Waller has definitely got he's going to have pressure from the White House not to raise, but he's also got a credibility issue that he's got to establish. So, Jason, it is interesting. We counted it up. I think we're over 70 CEOs. We've interviewed over 160 people at this point. 70 of them CEOs, many of them the largest LTL logistics companies in our space. I asked the question on every single person that's on this show, what is volume looking like? And it's interesting because they always say, well, we think the economy isn't as robust as we're seeing it. However, our volumes are really strong. And what's funny about it is a lot of them go, but these are our initiatives that are driving volume. And it does tell me, similar to what you're seeing, is that I think volumes are stronger than a lot of people. The market is so fragmented, it's hard to know. But you look at the railroads. I always say Wednesday's my favorite day because the AAR data, it's incredibly robust. Bloomberg's chief economist last week posted something about the fact that earnings have come in so strong and demand's much stronger than they're expected. They believe the economy's ripping. I mean, that is Bloomberg's chief economist, U.S. chief economist, would attest that we're in a really substantial recovery right now, at least in our industrial, and it's fanning out. I understand there's risks here, but if this volume and momentum were to sustain, what do you think that means for freight?
Well, I mean, right now, so if you take that thesis and then say, okay, volume is up from last year, I'm going to peg it at maybe about 1 to 1.5%. In comparison, in 2018, we were looking at 3.5% to 4% up. So it's not the type of all industry freight growth that we saw, would that be 8 years ago in comparison? So I think, where that puts it to me is if I go with that thesis, but then I look and say tender rejections have settled down, and Craig, you've got the exact number, but, somewhere around 13-ish% right now, we can start to see, metrics. I think I'm just waiting for FTR and Truck Stop to publish their weekly update on the spot market, see where their market demand index is at. But we've seen that regular seasonal cooling. Things haven't tightened anymore. And so what that does suggest to me is I don't think there's that much additional capacity exiting the market right now. We likely have some capacity getting eliminated by further regulatory enforcement, but that is getting replaced essentially by new capacity. Net operating authorities are up a little bit from where they had been. And when you look even at new heavy truck sales as picked up by the BEA, who gets the data from Wards, you had this horrible period from about September of 2025 through April of this year where heavy truck sales literally had fallen off a cliff. Now we're kind of back to that 450,000 unit a year annualized basis. It was kind of consistent with the sort of 2024, 2025-ish levels. And And so it would seem that at least we've seen a little bit of recovery there. We've had very strong new orders. And so that's where I do expect a little bit this fourth quarter, but especially next year, we will start to see some capacity start to trickle in. And that's really a question that if can demand keep growing more rapidly than that capacity can add itself.
But Jason, is the drop-off in truck demand, a lot of that, as I understand it, maybe you have some different data on this, was that engine question of like, what does emissions look like? Fleets are like, hey, until we get resolution and some clarity, we're just going to go to the sidelines and wait.
Right. And so now that boom, or that you replied to, of more truck orders is those emission standards come out, and it's replenishment because they waited longer to do the replenishment in many cases than just new truck. Like
I'm not hearing anything. I mean, the larger carriers that we've interviewed are just talking about that they can't find drivers right now. And, you know, John Kingston had the employment data. I know you track this stuff very closely. Transportation employment hasn't moved since February. So again, I'm still struggling. I understand the arguments that Ken's making. I understand your concerns about going forward. You also have made the case that every cycle we see, you know, eventually the market finds a price and drivers are replaced and this happens. But where are these drivers going to come from? The data, at least I can't find it, is not showing that drivers are showing up. Are you seeing something else?
So if you look specifically at general freight trucking, long distance truckload, so that is the industry sector that most closely approximates what we think about as sort of dry van operations. We are up a little bit from the low point, which was February. So in February, the bottom that was estimated was at about 494,000. We're at about 500,000, so a very slight uptick. No, again, it's a very gradual rebound from that. And again, I'm not expecting next couple months, it's going to be very, very, very slow if we see much of an uptick. And in 27, it's again likely to be a slower, slower process in terms of increases compared again to prior cycles. But I'm a firm believer that labor markets work. You'll see wages go up, wages start going up. That'll pull people in from other occupations that are not seeing as rapid of wage increases. There's a good paper for everybody out there. It's publicly available by Stephen Burks and Kristen Monaco from 2019 from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that looked at essentially where do people enter trucking from, so what other occupations. And it really is a hodgepodge. It's folks coming from material handling jobs. It's folks coming from office jobs. There's not a disproportionate construction story that we'll often hear about. And that is using the actual population representative data from the current population survey. So my statement is it's going to take time. And we always see this with every cycle. I mean, in 2017, into 2018, the market really flips more primarily as a demand side story. In late Q2, early Q3 of 17, we don't start seeing capacity meaningfully really coming online until mid 2028. So there was almost a year lag there. If you again say the market really kind of flipped December last year, but we weren't really sure whether that was weather or other things till call it late February, you're not looking at significant entry until mid-2027 based on sort of that, 9-month to 1 year lag.
Ken, any thoughts on that in terms of your perspective on capacity?
I mean, I think, I said this the last time I was on, I think 2027 will be one of the best years for brokers in recent memory. And that's because I think I'm maybe a little bit longer in the front half of the cycle than Jason. I think probably somewhere after the fourth next year, mid-year next year, heading into peak, we'll see rates kind of start to tip and lose their year-over-year steam. But I don't know, like we say that it's not,
Ken, right? I assume you're when you say
spot and then contract probably falling after the
contract actually starts to trough and drop from comps.
No. Sorry. Yeah. Spot rates mid-year trending towards kind of the end of Q3, and then contract rates probably won't get picked up until the big RFP seasons hit after peak. So, I think it's a typical 3 to 6 month lag. But also, like, going back to where are the drivers going to come from? Like, I mean, we're all sitting here and we've been talking about nonstop for the last 9 months, like the Biden trucking action plan. Like, I would not be at all surprised if we're sitting here this time next year and there's still large fleets can't find drivers, large private fleets, right? The rise of private fleets. my guess is there'll probably be government jobs programs to, like, you're already starting to see the veterans, right? I forget, there was a really cool name for it that they're trying to put forward to like assimilate more. And I can tell you from deep statistical analysis, the single best owner operator, small fleet owner is ex-military and ideally running the business with a spouse. Like that is the best of the best. So I think you'll probably start to see more and more jobs programs to get folks into driving. And that's where the drivers will come from. I think the market will clear a price to get them in.
So Jason, I have a different take than Ken does. I think anytime, and I'd love to get your take, throughout history, anytime we see an industry go from no regulation to all of a sudden regulation momentum, the pendulum tends to swim into much tighter regulation. If you look at the banking sector, for years, there was a movement to really tighten on regulation. You could look at even decarbonization. Those cycles of regulation, when we start to see that momentum go in an industry, at least the incumbents want more regulation, is that pendulum doesn't swing back very fast. Any thoughts there?
So I think that, the small carriers of the world all get votes as well, and so do all the owner operators in every congressional district. So I think there'll be a pushback, I think, from a very vocal voting bloc in case they view things as, getting, too overregulated. I think one of the challenges right now we have as well is, you heard you all talking about, and there's no doubt of this, brokers are trying to figure out, okay, in a post-Montgomery world, what is reasonable care for sourcing capacity? How do we go about using publicly available data from the FMCSA to make informed decisions? With that, I think brokers tried various different approaches in the immediate aftermath of Montgomery, probably tightened things down a little too much, and then they started to realize some of the nuances of the data that's available and likely made some changes. I think, the idea that at some point FMCSA is ever going to publish a list of unsafe carriers, that will never happen. There's no way that available safety data could reasonably be used to make essentially a kill decision on a carrier's operating authority based solely on that. That's why we have the audits in place. So I think that we've seen, some shift that way, but I think the industry is, very strongly deregulated. And at the end of the day, one of the cautions I always have is, again, thinking about the Federal Reserve. There's a 2024 study that found that the elevated freight rates in trucking were the 10th most important industry in the country for explaining the year-over-year price changes we were seeing in 2022 relative to 2021. So the only industries that are higher are things like, petroleum refining, steel production and chemical production. Trucking sitting down here at number 10. And so that is an industry the Fed is watching closely. And so that's one where what the industry should want is price increases that are allowing for safe, profitable operations, but are not so steep that it makes the Fed start thinking, okay, we've got an overheated economy. We need to start breaking out the interest rate hammer and cool this down a little bit.
But Jason, OIDA has been very vocal. We've had them on the show a number of times. They want tighter regulations. I mean, they're the most powerful independent association. So when I look at the parties that influence Congress, these lobbyist organizations, you look at and you can go through the list. It's all alphabet soup. ATA, tighter regulations. TCA, tighter regulations. These are two of the most powerful. NPTC, tighter regulations. Like the OIDA, tighter regulations. It strikes me that all of these that rarely get along, by the way, like ATA and I've had a couple of back and forths at times. They are actually,
but they have aligned incentives in this case, right?
Well, everyone realizes that regulation got too loose.
And higher rates, more barriers to entry, all of that leads for these groups, for their constituents to be more profitable, right?
I think they all realize when you deregulate so significantly and eliminate the barriers to entry, it's not the larger carriers that end up winning. I asked my brother, who was on the board of the ATA, a couple years ago. Now he's building homes, which is another difficult market right now. Why was the ATA pushing this driver shortage narrative? And he basically said, look, they never believed that the brokers would ever play a role in radio routing guides. They didn't see it. It was sort of an old way of thinking, and they thought brokers would be a secondary player, a backhaul player, and that the guys that would have the freight, and again, if brokers get freight, it's the small carriers that win. They never thought the brokers would be primary position routing guides. So they thought that by lowering the barriers to entry for truck drivers, that those truck drivers, the only way that they could get freight and jobs was to go join the larger carriers. What they didn't expect to happen was that the bottom would fall out. When you deregulated the industry, the bottom fall out. And so I understand Ken's point, and I think if we looked at historical trends, I think he's right. But I also think this industry is starving for more regulation, which is a very weird thing to say in the history of trucking. I've been in it my whole life. They want more regulation at the state and federal level. So I don't see how all of a sudden they're going to change and realize, oh my gosh, we've overcorrected. I just don't see the case for that.
So what I would argue,
Go ahead, Jason.
what I would argue is what they're really looking for is they want more what we call state capacity from an enforcement standpoint to get the bad actors out of the equation. So what I see this more as is a call for we need more state capacity, more regulatory capability of getting those bad actors out, the chameleon carriers, the shockingly unsafe fly-by-night new entrants and things of that sort. What I don't think we'll see is a shift towards actual economic regulation. So I think what we've had happen is you've had speaking as an economist, you've had basically a technological innovation in the production technology of the industry. And that is, as you mentioned, Craig, brokers now playing a primary role in a lot of shippers' routing guides. It was not something that we foresaw 20 years ago. What that has done is it has made it more possible for small operators to survive and even thrive. The challenge is small operators have far less incentive to operate safely. And so now what we have is more of a regulatory capacity challenge, because capacity is more fragmented today than what it was a decade ago. When you look at the number of firms that are out there in trucking versus a decade ago, you can start to see, okay, the average firm size has declined tremendously. So you have an issue of needing more, essentially regulatory capacity. And so that's the language I wish we would all use, because that's what I think we're really all talking about is we need more regulatory capacity.
Jason, I agree 100% with what you said. Nobody wants more economic regulation, rate regulation. No one's arguing for that, except some really call it fringe voices on social media want to go back to the Motor Carrier Act days and ICC days. That's never happening. That's not going to happen. Amazon could not survive if we had the types of regulations we had during regulated days. I don't think there's any case for that. But I do think the industry is worried about who is driving our trucks. And they seem far more concerned about it than they have ever been, because they realize that, as to your point, these small actors did not have the incentives nor the reasons to actually manage safety. And the industry was set up to exploit this lack of regulation. And so, I don't know. I see a massive change. And look, I know you've talked to the FMCSA. I've talked to the DOT as well, and members of Congress. They're all thinking we need tighter regulations. We need to get rid of bad actors. And I think this is, by the way, it's a Democrat and Republican issue, except in some fringe parts of the Democratic Party where they're so far to the left than the general sort of sense is, where they want no regulations for immigration. I think the majority of Americans and our lawmakers realize that we need to have some control of whom's driving our trucks, particularly when it comes to safety.
No, exactly. And this is where, to me, it comes back to, you see the behavior during Blitz Week. You see how the average age of trucks on the road, a lot of the old equipment gets taken offline. You see a lot of the for-hire owner operators in the fleets with 2 to 6 trucks, they start sitting out. That is a perfect example of this. What I would argue, for example, FMCSA needs to do more unannounced blitzes, but they need to reverse how they've done them in the past. Previously, they would target maintenance. That's not the thing you target with an unannounced blitz, because you need to give folks warning so they fix the stuff ahead of time. Yeah. So, you need more unannounced blitzes for speeding. You need more unannounced blitzes for HOS compliance and things of that sort. And to me, that's where, again, it comes back to regulatory capacity is really what we're talking about. And I think that is where we're all united in saying there needs to be a lot more regulatory capacity for this industry, because the changes in the production technology that we've seen with the ability of brokers to now be, 20 to 30% of, shippers' routing guides now means that we have this super long tail of very small carriers, which all of my research has shown are shockingly less compliant and less safe than your mega carriers.
Amen. Kamp, we're making history here, ladies and gentlemen. Jason Miller and I agreed on something, and it's on record. We appreciate that. So, Dr. Miller, great to see you. Ken, always a pleasure. It's a great show. We added time because it was so good. Jason, really appreciate it. You're always a wealth of information. So,
thank you.
We'll be back tomorrow. We have Pat Dillon, the CEO of Flock Freight, tomorrow to talk about consolidation of, we talked about LTL earlier, consolidation of LTL small shipments into truckload. We'll be getting into that tomorrow. Again, noon every single day. We'll see you then.